On a freezing Christmas Eve, beneath the dazzling lights of Chicago, a millionaire CEO stumbled upon a sight that would change his life forever. A little girl, no older than 7, curled up on a park bench with nothing but a worn teddy bear to protect her from the cold. When he knelt beside her and whispered, "Why are you sleeping here, sweetheart?" her quiet reply cut through years of silence and grief he thought would never heal. It was more than just a question and an answer. It was the moment two broken souls collided, and hope dared to be reborn. This is not just a story about wealth or loss. It's about the power of kindness, second chances, and how one act of compassion can rewrite a destiny. If you believe in stories that stir the heart and remind us of humanity's deepest truths, subscribe now to Hidden Echo Stories. Andrew Whittaker sat in the back of his sleek black town car, its leather interior warmed by the steady hum of the heater. Outside, Chicago was alive, glittering in its holiday best. Strings of golden lights draped across Michigan Avenue, laughter spilled from bundled families carrying bright shopping bags, and the air carried that sharp, crisp scent that only a snowy Christmas Eve could bring. Yet for Andrew, none of it mattered. The city sparkled like a jewel, but to him it was all hollow, a reflection of a life that looked perfect on paper but was shattered at its core. Once, Christmas had been the season he cherished most. 3 years ago, his home had been filled with small, joyous disruptions, the patter of little feet, giggles that erupted at the most unexpected moments, crayons forgotten on countertops. His daughter Lily had been the heart of his world. She was the kind of child whose laughter lit up every corner of their apartment, whose voice could transform an ordinary day into a memory worth keeping. But all of that had vanished in a single winter's breath. A sudden, brutal illness had stolen her away, leaving behind nothing but silence and the echo of promises he could never fulfill. Even now, Andrew woke most nights reaching instinctively for the sound of her breathing, only to be crushed by the stillness of his empty penthouse. The grief had not softened with time. Instead, it calcified, settling like ice in his chest. Each holiday season only made it worse. Every ornament, every carol, every burst of laughter in the streets reminded him of what he had lost. The city's lights might warm the hearts of others, but to him they were sharp edges, cutting deeper into wounds that refused to close. The gala invitation weighed in his pocket like a stone. Each year, the Whittaker Foundation hosted a glittering holiday event, champagne, speeches, applause, and endless empty chatter. Andrew no longer went out of joy or pride. He went out of obligation because appearances mattered in the corporate world. His cufflinks shone under the ballroom lights, his smile rehearsed to perfection, but inside he was as barren as the winter trees outside. Tonight had been no different. He had stood at the podium, delivered his annual remarks, listened to the polite clapping that echoed through the hall, and felt absolutely nothing. The faces blurred together, colleagues, donors, acquaintances who claimed to admire him but did not know the first thing about the man he truly was. By the time the orchestra struck up another round of carols, Andrew had quietly excused himself. He slipped out into the night not because he was tired, but because he could no longer bear the weight of pretending. Snow drifted steadily now, catching in the glow of street lamps and painting the sidewalks white. Andrew walked without direction, his polished shoes crunching on the fresh layer of frost. His mind was far away, sifting through memories he both clung to and dreaded. He thought of Lily's small hand wrapped in his, the way she used to tug him toward shop windows filled with toys and sweets. He thought of the promise he had whispered in the hospital, that he would always protect her, that she would never be alone. A promise that dissolved the moment she slipped away. People often said grief was a journey, something you walked through step by painful step until you emerged stronger. But Andrew knew that was a lie. For him, grief was not a road, it was a cage. Every attempt to move forward slammed him against its bars. His business thrived, his wealth grew, but none of it mattered. He had everything and yet absolutely nothing. The sound of laughter carried across the street and Andrew turned his head. A group of children darted past, red scarves trailing behind them, their parents struggling to keep up. The sight was a knife twisting deep inside. For a moment, his breath caught in his throat and he had to stop walking, steadying himself against a lamppost. He wanted to look away, to shut the world out as he had so many times before, but he couldn't. In those fleeting seconds, Andrew realized the truth he had been running from. He was terrified of joy. Joy meant remembering what he had lost. Joy meant risking the possibility of losing again. So he had locked himself away in routines, in boardrooms and contracts, in the illusion of control. Yet here he was, adrift in the snow, a man with wealth enough to buy anything except the one thing he wanted most, his daughter back. The streets grew quieter the farther he walked from the bustle of Michigan Avenue. The music and chatter faded into the distance, replaced by the muffled crunch of snow beneath his feet and the occasional honk of a distant cab. He welcomed the silence, the solitude. It was easier to carry his sorrow when no one else was watching. But solitude has a way of turning into suffocation. As Andrew rounded a quiet corner lined with barren trees wrapped in faint blue lights, he felt that familiar tightness in his chest, the kind that whispered he would always be alone. He shoved his hands deeper into his coat pockets, lowering his head against the wind. It was then, just as he was sinking back into the numb rhythm of isolation, that a flicker of movement caught his eye. At first he thought it was nothing, just a trick of the snow or a shadow cast by the lights. But then he saw it again, the faint outline of a small figure on a weathered park bench. He slowed his steps, squinting through the swirling flakes. A child, curled up, motionless except for the slight rise and fall of her shoulders. Andrew stopped dead in his tracks. His first instinct was to turn away, to leave it for someone else. Surely there were shelters, social workers, people better suited to handle whatever this was. But he didn't move. He couldn't. Something about the tiny frame, the way the child clutched what looked like a stuffed bear to her chest, rooted him to the spot. For the first time in years, his heart raced not from grief, but from something else entirely: fear, protectiveness, and a faint, dangerous spark of hope. He stood there for a long moment, snow collecting on his coat, the city a blur of cold and silence around him. His logical mind screamed at him to walk away. But his heart, the part of him he thought had died with Lily, was already moving forward. The night had grown colder, the snow swirling harder as if the city itself wanted to bury its secrets beneath a white shroud. Andrew stood still on the deserted path, his breath fogging in the air, eyes fixed on the tiny figure huddled on the park bench. At first his mind tried to rationalize what he was seeing. Maybe her parents had stepped away for just a moment. Maybe she was waiting for someone nearby. Maybe he was mistaken entirely. But deep inside, he knew the truth. The child was alone. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. Her coat, far too large for her small frame, hung off her shoulders like a borrowed garment, and her knees were pulled tightly against her chest. In her arms, she clutched a battered teddy bear, its fur worn thin, its button eye dangling precariously. The sight carved into Andrew like a blade. For a heartbeat, it was as though Lily had returned, fragile and luminous, calling him back to life. He hesitated. A voice inside urged him to keep walking. This wasn't his responsibility. He wasn't equipped for this. What if the child panicked? What if someone accused him of interfering? He had spent years building a fortress of distance between himself and anything that might crack open his wounds. Yet here, in the quiet shadow of the park, that fortress crumbled in an instant. Before he realized it, his feet carried him closer. The snow crunched softly under his shoes as he approached, careful, almost reverent, as though he were nearing something sacred. He crouched beside the bench, lowering himself to the child's level. Up close, she seemed even smaller, her cheeks flushed raw by the cold, her lips cracked and trembling. "Hey there," he said gently, his voice softer than he remembered it could be. "Are you all right?" The girl didn't answer. Her eyes, wide and glassy, flicked toward him, then quickly back to the teddy bear clutched in her arms. She shivered violently, her small shoulders jerking beneath the oversized coat. Andrew felt a surge of panic. He fumbled in his pocket, pulling out a handkerchief, though he had no idea what to do with it. Anything, he thought. Anything to prove he wasn't here to harm her. "Are you waiting for someone?" he tried again. His tone carried a gentleness that surprised even him, a tenderness buried under years of boardrooms and sterile speeches. For a long moment there was only silence, the whisper of snow, the distant rumble of traffic, the faint whine of the wind threading through bare branches. Then, so softly he almost didn't catch it, the girl whispered, "I'm waiting for my mommy. She said not to move." The word struck Andrew like a hammer. For a moment the world tilted. His chest tightened, his breath caught. The memory crashed into him. The hospital room, Lily's hand in his desperate promise that he would never leave her side. A promise he couldn't keep. Now before him another child, abandoned, trusting, fragile, repeated the same desperate hope. He swallowed hard, his throat burning. "How long have you been waiting?" The girl's head dropped lower. "A while," she murmured. Andrew scanned the park. Empty. No frantic parents, no sign of anyone searching. Just snow piling on the frozen pond and the playground standing like a forgotten monument in the dark. Fear gnawed at him. Whoever this little girl was, she was alone in a city too vast and too cruel for a child her age. Without thinking, Andrew shrugged off his heavy overcoat and draped it around her. The coat nearly swallowed her, the fabric pooling around her tiny form. For a moment she stiffened, eyes darting up at him as though uncertain whether to accept the gesture. Then she sank into the warmth, her breath coming out in shallow, foggy bursts. "You're freezing," Andrew murmured. "Let's get you somewhere warm, okay?" She didn't respond immediately. He could see the battle in her eyes, fear of trusting, fear of moving, fear of everything she had already endured. Her fingers tightened around the teddy bear, knuckles white. Andrew recognized that look. It was the same look he had seen on himself in the mirror after Lily's death, the look of someone holding onto the only thing left when the world had taken too much. The wind whipped harder, cutting through even his suit. Snowflakes stung his cheeks. Time was running out. He waited, not wanting to force her, but silently praying she would give him a sign. Finally, she nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. It was enough. Relief flooded him. Carefully, he slid his arms beneath her, lifting her from the bench. She weighed almost nothing, bones and hope wrapped in a threadbare coat. She trembled against him, but she didn't resist. Instead, she pressed her face against his chest as though listening for something steady in a world that had given her none. Andrew's breath caught again, but this time it wasn't grief alone. It was something new, something terrifying and fragile, the sense that for the first time in years someone needed him, truly needed him. The city around them blurred into irrelevance. The only sounds were the crunch of his shoes in the snow and the faint heartbeat he felt against his chest. As he carried her back toward the lights of Michigan Avenue, something shifted inside him. The promises he had once broken, the ones that haunted him every night, seemed to stir, begging for a chance at redemption. For years, Andrew Whittaker had lived like a ghost, watching the world but never daring to touch it. Now, with a child cradled in his arms, he felt the faint spark of life return. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether he was strong enough, whether he deserved this second chance. But tonight, beneath the cold indifference of the city, he took his first step toward healing. The little girl stirred, her voice a whisper against his collar. "My name, Emily." Andrew repeated it softly, as though anchoring her in the world. "Emily," he said, "that's a beautiful name." And with that, the frozen walls around his heart began, at last, to crack. Andrew carried Emily through the revolving doors of his high-rise building, the marble lobby gleaming under golden light. The doorman, accustomed to Andrew's solitary arrivals, raised an eyebrow at the sight of the bundled child in his arms. But Andrew offered no explanation, only a curt nod, before guiding Emily into the private elevator. The doors closed with a hush, sealing them in a cocoon of silence. For years, Andrew's penthouse had been a mausoleum, a polished, cavernous space where grief echoed through every hallway. Tonight, as he laid Emily gently on the sofa and draped a blanket over her, the apartment felt different. It was still quiet, still too large, but for the first time it seemed to hold a fragile purpose. He busied himself in the kitchen, fumbling awkwardly with cocoa mix and a chipped mug that had belonged to Lily. His hands, steady in boardrooms, trembled over something as simple as boiling water. Emily watched him with wary eyes, her bear clutched tightly. When he set the steaming cup before her, she hesitated, then slowly took a sip. The faintest trace of relief softened her shoulders. It was a beginning. Over the next days, a tentative rhythm took shape. Andrew found himself waking earlier, not to check emails but to see if Emily was still asleep, safe under the covers of the guest room. He made breakfasts that often burned, pancakes shaped like bears, grilled cheese sandwiches sliced too thick. Emily ate quietly, her manners too careful for a child her age. Yet little by little, color returned to her cheeks. She drew often sketches of doors, women in red scarves, and looming figures that haunted the edges of the page. Andrew recognized pain woven into every line, but he also saw resilience, a determination to capture her world even when it was fractured. One afternoon, she showed him a drawing of an apartment door marked 204, beside a shadowy figure with indistinct features. Her voice shook when she whispered, "That's the man who scared us." Andrew felt a chill, a rising anger he hadn't allowed himself in years. It was clear Emily's story was not only about poverty or neglect. Something darker lingered in her past. Mrs. Ramirez, his longtime housekeeper, watched with sharp eyes. One evening she pulled Andrew aside. "You cannot save everyone, sir. This isn't just kindness, it's a responsibility. Children get attached. Be careful not to make promises you cannot keep." Her words were firm but softened by concern. Andrew nodded, though inside he bristled. How could he walk away now? That night, as Emily watched a cartoon reindeer with distant eyes, Andrew dialed Child Protective Services. The agent on the line sighed wearily. "Every shelter is full. If she's safe with you, let her stay. We'll follow up tomorrow." Relief should have come, but Andrew only felt the weight of a new promise settling on his shoulders. The days blurred into fragile routines. Emily began to trust in small ways, a request for extra syrup, a giggle at a burnt pancake, the way her hand lingered in his when he tucked her into bed. She hummed as she drew, her voice quiet but steady. Each sound was like sunlight breaking through the long winter of his grief. But shadows were never far. Emily's health worried him. She was underweight, often exhausted. A pediatrician confirmed it: chronic fatigue, malnourishment, the signs of a child who had endured too much. Andrew bought her new clothes, a winter coat, boots that fit. She touched them with reverence as if they were treasures beyond her reach. Yet guilt gnawed at him. No gift could erase the years of hunger and fear she had faced. Then came the knock at the door. Lisa, Emily's aunt, arrived unannounced. Perfectly dressed, her voice sweet but edged with calculation, she spoke of family stepping in and a stable future. But her eyes lingered on Andrew's wealth, the art on the walls, the view of the city skyline. Emily clung to Andrew's hand, shrinking behind him, refusing to move when Lisa called her sweetheart. The message was clear. Emily had chosen her protector. Lisa's visit left the penthouse colder than any snowfall. That night, Emily drew another picture: herself, Andrew, her mother in a red scarf, and a dark figure at the edge of a blue door. "Will she take me away?" she whispered. Andrew knelt beside her. "No one is taking you anywhere you don't want to go, not while I'm here." It was a vow heavier than any corporate contract, but he meant it. Still, the threats pressed in. Lisa pursued legal action, child services grew cautious, and the unknown danger from Emily's past loomed like a shadow over every day. Nights became restless. Emily woke from nightmares, sobbing for her mother. Sometimes she wandered into the hallway at 2 in the morning, eyes wide with terror, until she saw Andrew waiting. He sat with her, stroking her hair, whispering promises he prayed he could keep. It was during one of those sleepless nights that Emily finally told him the truth. Wrapped in a quilt, she whispered about a man who followed her and her mother, a face she never saw but always felt. "Mommy said stay put, don't move," She'd come back. Andrew's hands clenched into fists, rage rising in his chest. Desperate for answers, he called Marcus Bennett, a trusted investigator. Within days, Marcus uncovered the unthinkable: footage of Julia, Emily's mother, struck down by a car registered to her abusive ex. It wasn't an accident. It was attempted murder. Julia had been silenced, leaving Emily exposed. Andrew returned home, fury and resolve burning inside him. He found Emily sketching quietly, her eyes full of unspoken fear. She asked in a trembling voice, "If Mommy doesn't come back, can you still be my family?" The words pierced him deeper than any business loss, deeper than the grief that had defined him. He gathered her into his arms, his voice fierce and trembling. "I'll always be here for you, I promise." For the first time since Lily's death, the vow was not broken by circumstance or fate. It was alive, real, binding. That night, as snow lashed the penthouse windows, Andrew sat by Emily's bedside, holding her small hand until sleep claimed her. He was no longer just a grieving father. He was something more: protector, guardian, the fragile beginning of hope. And in the quiet glow of the nightlight, Andrew Whittaker understood that love, once thought dead, had been reborn in the most unexpected way. Snow still blanketed the city of Chicago, but inside Andrew Whittaker's penthouse, the cold had finally lifted. Once a hollow monument to loss, the space now pulsed with warmth, laughter, and the fragile beauty of a second chance. Emily's giggles drifted down hallways once haunted by silence. Her drawings filled the walls with color, and the scent of cocoa and pancakes replaced the sterile emptiness of grief. For years, Andrew had lived as if his heart had been buried with his daughter Lily. But through Emily, he discovered that love does not end when life breaks. It waits, patient, until it finds a way back. The journey had been anything but easy. Fear pressed at the doors in the form of legal battles, shadows from Emily's past, and the gnawing dread of losing again. Yet every trial revealed a truth Andrew had once denied. Love is not weakness. It is the very strength that pulls us through the darkest nights. In Emily's trembling trust, he found courage. In Julia's return, he found forgiveness. And in the fragile family they built together, he found the kind of redemption that no amount of wealth could ever buy. It is easy to believe that life is defined by what we lose. But sometimes it is defined by what we choose to hold on to: the hand of a frightened child, the whisper of a promise made in the dark, the decision to stay when everything in us wants to run. Andrew had once been a man shattered by grief, surviving only out of habit. Now he was something far more powerful: a father reborn through kindness, chosen family, and the courage to love again. Their story reminds us that no wound is too deep for healing, no winter too cold for hope to break through. Even in a world that can be cruel, there are still sparks of compassion, still hearts willing to protect, still chances to begin again. And perhaps that is the lesson we all need: that we are not alone, that love, however unexpected, can rewrite the story of our lives. If this story has touched your heart, even just a little, stay with us. Because here at Hidden Echo Stories, every tale is a reminder that kindness matters, that second chances exist, and that the quiet power of love can change everything. Subscribe now, and let the next story remind you of what is possible when we choose to care.